Welcome to Lecture 3 for English 421Y, Technical Writing. In this lecture, I will discuss organization, layout, and language in effective resumes. Resumes have a very specific set of conventions that have become standardized within American corporate culture. More than cover letters, if you break these conventions, you are unlikely to get the job because recruiters have developed entrenched habits and expectations after looking at so many applications over the years. However, one of the readings that we will look at this semester, Diaz's Updating Best Practices, argues that many of these conventions are so well established that we don't bother to question them or wonder why it should be done the way it has been. Her study revisits many of these conventions in order to provide an empirical basis for producing resumes meant to be read on screens rather than on paper. Specifically, she advocates a number of methods that I think are extremely useful for us as we develop sort of more effective resumes. So throughout this article, she introduces updated best practices and kind of goes through common best practices and then revises them for a contemporary approach. Specifically, she advocates an interesting method called the F zone. Basically, imagine you drew a letter F on a resume. You can see it right here. According to her study, this is where a reader will look to find the most important information. So readers will look at the top, they'll look at contact information and education. They might browse the first entry of professional work experience or whatever, and then they sort of scan down to the other sections. That means that the place that they look most is in the top left, and the place that they look least is in the bottom right. To get the most out of the F zone, she suggests 1, placing keywords tailored to the position within the first 11 characters of each line. So that works out to roughly the first 3 to 5 words of each bullet point. These are the most important, according to Diaz, because that's what somebody's going to see when they skim down in the F zone position. Second, you want to use emphasis, bold, italics, color, different font, bullet points, things that contrast important elements of your resume to the neutral text of the resume. For instance, in this example, you can see there's a clear difference between the section heading, which is in caps, all caps, and the section subheading, which is in bold. This bold is then used consistently, and this format is used consistently. So that as someone is scanning down, they know that when they see bold, they're still within a section, and then immediately after that, they see more details about that job, and how long that person was there. And then they have bullet points that show more kind of skills, abilities, and responsibilities. This is consistently used throughout the document, so as someone is scanning, they don't have to relearn a new format for each section. It follows the same exact format throughout the document and is consistent. Diaz's recommendations about emphasis, keywords, and tailoring make a big difference in showing the recruiter that your resume fits their job requirements. One area on which I disagree with Diaz is the importance of parallelism and active verbs. That is, starting each bullet point with a past tense action verb. She claims that adhering to parallelism can disrupt the 11-character rule, which is true. However, I think there is enough value placed on parallelism that not using consistent action verbs is risky. That is, people expect each section to be roughly the same, each bullet point to start similarly, and people expect strong action verbs to be used. If you don't use them, you're falling out of those expectations. A compromise is strategically tailoring your action verbs for the position using keywords from the job description, which we talked about in the previous lecture. One of the best resources for formatting that first 11 characters is the Purdue OWL's action verb list, which categorizes verbs based on the kinds of professional skills they reflect, such as management, communication, research, etc. You can get to this list by just Googling Purdue OWL action verb list, Again, you can see they have categories with examples and then synonyms, different words that can be used to communicate the same thing. Crafting your bullet points using a combination of these action verbs and key terms that you pull from websites for the company or from the job description will allow you to create a consistent set of bullet points that meet audience expectations while also introducing information that is relevant to the employer. Bullet points are also really important in a resume rather than using full sentences or not using bullet points, because bullet points force you to write in a more kind of fragmented or phrase format rather than using a full sentence. That allows you to quickly and compactly present your information and then move on to the next bullet. As a rule of thumb, you should have between 2 and 5 bullet points. More than 4 or 5 is too many. Fewer than 2 is not enough. But really, the kind of keywords you use depends on what type of resume you're creating. As Chapter 12 of the Essentials of Technical Communication argues, there are 2 general systems of organization for resumes. The chronological resume, which shows steady progression towards the career that you seek, and the functional resume, which highlights the experiences and abilities that show you to your greatest advantage. A chronological resume works best when you have significant experience in the same area or field over an extended period of time. A functional resume is most effective when you have a deep set of skills in different areas, including work experience, but also extracurricular activities, internships, projects, clubs, organizations, what have you. Functional resumes are less conventional and might have sections or structures that are unfamiliar to a reader. What they lack in tradition, they make up for in customization. Chronological resumes are the most traditional and allow you to make an argument for how your various positions fit together into a professional identity that you've developed over the years. So in our project, I'm asking you to develop multiple drafts of your resume. I expect when you start, you'll have sort of a resume that you may have used in the past. I want you to consider, as you revise and iterate on your original resume, which form of resume you are developing. Is it functional? Do you have a lot of skills in different areas? Or is it chronological? Is the most important thing to show that you've been working in your field or you've been steadily developing a professional identity for the last, 3 to 5 years? Part of the reason resumes have so many conventions is that they are very short. They're no more than one single-sided page. To fit the amount of information that needs to be there into such a small space requires not only effective uses of language, but also effective page design. This is why we will be doing an activity in this project that will introduce you to some principles of resume design. For this activity, I'm having you watch a short video from Time and then read an article on LinkedIn. Both of these will introduce design principles and kind of key concepts that will allow you to create a resume that looks fresh and compelling. To fit the amount of information in that needs to be there, you need to consider principles of effective design using the acronym somewhat unfortunately named CRAP. CRAP stands for contrast, repetition, alignment, and proximity. When you look at a resume that effectively uses these principles, you'll notice right away some of the things that it's doing. Contrast, for instance, is making 2 or more items identical or obviously different. The contrast on this, you have contrast between headings and neutral body text. You have context between things that are fully left justified and things that are indented. You have contrast between things that are formatted in bold and things that are not formatted in bold or use all caps or use italics. Contrast should be minimal. It should be something that you do deliberately, but only to a few things. If everything contrasts, then there's no consistency. There's no neutral text to which the non-neutral text can contrast. If everything is emphasized, then nothing is emphasized. And then you are effectively not using any contrast at all. Repetition is reusing key elements of a design to achieve unity and balance. Again, as I said earlier, people have expectations. Readers have expectations that each section is going to follow a similar format. You can see in this that coursework, professional experiences, work experiences, and skills all follow roughly the same structure. I recommend using the same exact structure with bullet points and subsections and dates and locations for as many sections as possible. Again, so you're repeating these elements. The reader knows that every section is going to be roughly the same, even if the information is slightly different. Alignment is the lining up of objects on a page so as to create consistency. This is also really, really important. Here you can see the bullet points don't quite line up with the bullet points down here, which is something that would be changed. You want to make sure that you are being consistent with where things begin and end on the page. That's less important on this right side unless you are putting your dates on the right side of the page. If your dates were on the right side of the page, as I'll show you an example of in a second here, then you would want those dates to be consistently aligned on the right as well. And then finally, proximity, grouping related objects together to imply a relationship. Anything that goes underneath a section heading is assumed to be part of that section heading. That's why you want the transition from one section to another to be very clear. Using contrast like different color, all caps, bold, or even horizontal lines make it very clear which items are proximal to other items and allow the reader to get a clear sense of when a change or a shift or a transition is happening. In a resume, proximity and alignment are related to hierarchy. Without space and linear consistency across a page, elements of the page would be too chaotic or overcrowded. By spacing them out vertically and horizontally with consistency, you can create a design that develops highly visible relationships between content on the page. Again, clear sections, clear and balanced quadrants, which we'll talk about in a second. For instance, subheadings that are left aligned with white space above and below and bullets that are indented by 1/4 inch, as you can see here, really catch the eye and draw the reader in by signaling a visible change. If you were to get rid of these bullet points and left align these points as well to the left side, there would be less contrast. If you got rid of the bold here, if you got rid of the all caps here, this section would be very difficult to differentiate. If you got rid of the bold and all cap section headings here, it would be really difficult to understand that this section is not a continuation of the previous section. Repetition and contrast, then, are used in resumes to create visual interest, to develop a theme or brand for your materials that is memorable, and to make key pieces of information jump off the page. I have noticed that people tend to overuse bold on resumes to the point where it stops standing out because everything is bolded. Minimal use of bold for specific elements on the page, such as subheadings, creates just enough repetition to create a pattern and just enough contrast to separate these subheadings from section headings and body text without overusing bold. Next, I want to call your attention to a PowerPoint presentation in Unit 1. I won't go over the whole presentation here, but it's called Tips for Making a Better Resume and provides 4 different categories to think about when revising your resume. Basic principles, including tailoring, making cuts and saving master copies, style and content, including phrases, action verbs, keywords, and bullets, design and layout, including minimalism, white space, hierarchy and emphasis, and revision and editing, including iteration, testing, and proofreading. So you'll see throughout this presentation I go into more kind of clear examples and detailed explanations of these different elements. When I grade, I will look for how you use these strategies to achieve a useful and readable document. The most important thing I want you to take away from this PowerPoint is that a good resume should be organized, balanced, purposeful, and constantly evolving. Next, I want to call your attention to some sample projects in the Unit 1 folder. I've included 4 different samples of resumes and 4 different samples of cover letters to show you different ways that you can approach the project. Hopefully these will give you some ideas or inspiration, but I don't present these to you as here is the definitive way to make a resume. Rather, they're an example of one way that illustrates some of the concepts that I'm hoping that you will get from this project. Looking at each of them, you'll notice decisions that writers made that made their resume unique and memorable. Resume 1, for instance, uses colored boxes and bold to signal section headings. This is a very high contrast document that includes clear distinctions between sections, and that makes it very easy to notice when the writer is moving on to the next section. Resume 2, in contrast, uses lines, all caps, and a limited amount of bold and italics. It has a lot more information. It's a lot more crowded, but it also uses pretty good white space. The horizontal lines, with this amount of information, the horizontal lines are really effective because they clearly show when the section is being, when the writer is moving on to the next section. Without these lines, this would be a sort of overcrowded or chaotic resume. Resume 3, in contrast, uses a striking typeface and font choices and a lot of white space to make information really pop off the page. There's less information on here, but it's a lot more visually pleasing than this resume. You can see there's higher contrast, there's a lot more space, everything is just less crowded, and it calls attention to the information that is on there. Finally, Resume 4 is a great example of using short phrases and keywords to attract the reader's attention. You can see that this does have this major gap in white space here, but this writer does such a good job of following Diaz's 11 characters. Look at each of these phrases. Analyzed and worked, measured dosage form parameters, examined USP guidelines. All of these things indicate to the reader that there's key information from the job position or posting or whatever, and their own experiences kind of being put together. Again, what I want you to take from the samples is not there is one way to do it, but rather there are many rhetorical decisions that can result in effective resumes based on the rhetorical situation in which the writer is working. The challenge is figuring out how to use these strategies to present your qualifications in a way that is organized, calls attention to key information, and aids in navigation for the reader. I want to end with some strategies for Unit 1 based on varying degrees of experience with writing resumes. If you have a resume already, there are a few things that you can do. First, you can significantly revise your current content or organization. Maybe you like your layout and your design and you just want to focus on updating your content. In contrast, maybe you want to significantly revise your current design and layout, but keep content mostly the same. Maybe you want to start entirely from scratch and go in a different direction. Maybe you want to use a more visually distinct layout. Maybe you want to develop a tailored resume different from your current version. Perhaps you are in 2 different fields. Like, for instance, when I was an undergrad, I did both journalism and technical writing. And I had one journalism resume and one technical writing resume. Maybe you want to work on creating a different type of resume. Maybe you have a chronological resume, but you want to work on a functional resume that better highlights the different skills that you've gained from internships or whatever. Or finally, maybe you want to focus on tailoring for jobs that you might apply to in the future. Maybe you already have a job, but perhaps you want to start working on a resume that will allow you to apply for a grant or apply for graduate school or something like that. If you don't have a resume, there are a couple things that I recommend. First, think about the experiences and qualifications you currently have and how they align with the positions that you want. You need to make that connection for the reader. Even if you don't have a lot of work experience, you need to show how experiences that you do have, such as internships, extracurricular positions, student organizations, whatever, how those will show the qualifications that you do have. Remember that work experience is not everything. Play to your strengths and include extracurricular activities, technical skills, projects, lab work, awards and honors, organizations and groups, internships, job shadowing, languages, etc. The more sections you have, the more versatile it shows that you are. And if you don't have a lot of work experience, including multiple sections that show a wide breadth of experiences indicates that you have a lot of other experiences that you can call upon. Third, create materials that will get you the job that will get you your next job. For instance, if you want to get an internship with a prestigious company like SpaceX, you need to have a job before that shows that you can do this. Take advantage of the experiences we have here at Purdue. There are a lot of things like RA positions, or being an intern for a lab or other organization on campus, or being a vice president of a student organization within your field. These are all things that will get you an internship, that will then get you a job at SpaceX or Apple or Tesla or whatever company is the hot thing this year. Think of it as stepping stones. You can't apply for a high-paying, great position in a place that everybody wants to live if you've never had a job. Use this project to apply for that first stepstone or second stepstone that will get you to a job later on. And finally, relax. As I've said before, resumes are living documents. Yours just started out. If you've never written a resume before, you're not going to make a perfect resume the first time. You're going to make a resume that's going to be, it's going to have problems, and then you're going to revise it, and then you're going to revise it again. Then you're going to revise it a year from now and make it something different. That's it for today. Good luck as you work on your resume.